This is Changeling the podcast.
Welcome to Changeling the podcast, where roses are red, hedge squirrels are blue, the gentry are coming and coming for you. I'm your host, Puka, and I am joined by co-host Fetch.
It's a pleasure to be here. Hard to believe that it's spring already.
I know.
It feels like just a few weeks ago it was winter.
Summer. Oh, that. Yeah. Well.
No, time is a cycle here, Puka. We're in the real world this time.
Is it, though? I think time has yet to be proved by science.
Folks, I'll be sure to take care of Puka and his clarity break later after the session.
Oh, man. I can't even think of what my clarity would be down to at this point. My clarity, I think, wanes over the course of the week. And then by this point, on like a Friday evening, it's just like in the dumps. So anyway.
Speaking of clarity, I think we'll be talking a bit about that in today's session, which is all about Rites of Spring.
Yes.
Do you want to tell us what the book is about and then talk about this amazing cover?
Yeah. Oh, I think this is probably my favorite of the covers of the original line. I am a huge fan of Stephanie Pomonlaw, who did the Dusk and Dawn covers, so hers are still my favorites. But out of the original lineup, this is almost certainly my favorite.
I feel this is a vivid image. Kind of a dark, maybe early morning street, woman in a diaphanous robe walking down, creating flowers as she goes. And did you catch the Easter egg?
Is it an actual Easter egg because Rites of Spring?
That would be good. But no, look at the brick wall on the left-hand side of the page just to... framed by that lamppost.
Oh,
Notice the poster. Yeah, they picked the Autumn Nightmares cover as a poster.
Isn't that just so clever?
It's really a beautiful picture. Honestly, so far, all of the covers for Changing the Lost have been absolute bangers. So, what is our book about today?
Well, I'm going to let the blurb on the back do the talking for me, where it says, this book includes expanded information on the magic of the lost, from their mystical lore to new and powerful contracts, greater detail on dream shaping, pledge crafting, clarity, the mask, and many other aspects of changeling magic, and many more tokens, goblin fruits, and other wonders to be found within the hedge.
The spoiler, it gives us all of that, and boy howdy does it ever.
Yeah, so with Winter Masks, we had a player's guide that expanded the character building options along a number of dimensions, like Kith and Seeming and Court. Now we have this other piece that expands what I would call character actions rather than creation, which is just as valuable. And along the lines of magic systems, that's what people are drawn to. Like, say what you will about the notion of a limited run game line, they are planned tight, and this book covers a ton of ground. It's a very dense text like all of the other ones we've seen, but given how core this is to people's experience of the game, it's like they really hit so many of the important notes for the game.
I agree. I'm looking forward to talking about some of these systems as we go and whether we might use them.
Yeah.
I want to talk about this. As always, we have an introductory story. This one is... Oh, yeah. So this is the story of a fetchmaker who has joined the Spring Court, is trying to move on with his life from the horrors that he's had to do, but gets asked to cure the cancer of a fetch that he had created. It's a somber and spooky story, but also humanizing, even for the fetch, with a tone of hope at the end. I loved it.
Yeah, it's quite good. The spring motif gives it some of the mood connection to the book, but I don't know if it really played much into the theme of desire. Well, the winter book didn't really do this either. The autumn book definitely played into the theme of fear, and so I was looking for the desire theme here. Maybe desire to be forgiven, or to heal and be healed, something like that. Anyway, it's a very good story, yeah.
I didn't care so much for the rest of the introduction for this chapter. I thought it was kind of middling. What did you think?
Well, I mean, introductions I find hard to necessarily judge when they're this short and sort of utilitarian, because it is mostly, here's what this book is, and they point to that in terms of theme and content. I don't know. I didn't hate it, but I wasn't particularly inspired by it either.
The one promising thing for me was that they give advice on using spring and desire as motifs, which I think is a good thing to do for the game, including the creepy and dark side of spring.
Yeah, that was something which I was trying to look for. So when we did Winter Masks, and I was thinking, I really don't see how this connects to winter at all. With this one, they kind of give notes about how fairy magic rests on rules and twists and catches, like there's always a cost to doing magic. And the book tries to link them to the transformative power of the seasons, especially those positive and negative aspects of spring. And then they kind of talk about desire, but the connection isn't really there. So what I would submit is that desire is the catalyst for acts of magic, and especially the desire to create in the context of this book. Like, the mystery of nature's respawning in the spring is kind of an idea I kept coming back to about what brings these things together. Desire and conception. Stillness and quiet transforming into movement and life and color, that kind of stuff. I don't think they really spell that out, but that's how I threaded the needle in my own read.
For me, desire shows up in the exploration of what the characters are willing to do to achieve magic and make changes in their own life, and to contextualize a lot of the history of the Fae. But I guess we'll see how well that really pans out in the course of the book itself. Motifs aside, I'm really excited to talk about what we've got going on here. You want to jump into chapter 1?
I would love to jump into chapter 1, which opens with a story about a library in a hollow that appears to be growing new books. Love it.
I love that detail. I love hollows. Hollows are so much fun as the lost parallel to freeholds.
100%. No notes. So this chapter is Rhyme and Unreason, and it's sort of the lore chapter. We start off with some Fae lore, so that what the Changelings tell themselves, which is a nice touch for players, I think, and particularly because I think every section in this part of the chapter has like multiple options, so you can actually have debates in character about who believes what. And we begin with the nature of Arcadia. So, we learn that the Lost theorize that Arcadia might be a single realm where reality is flexible, with the individual realms of the Keepers created or perhaps just kind of spawned around them. Or they might be all different worlds linked together, parallel universes that all happen to connect to Earth. I'm more in favor of the first one for kind of being a little bit more like dreaming. There's also this sidebar that points to mages and suggests that Arcadia, the supernal realm in Awakening, is not the same as Arcadia where the Keepers live, but there are mages who believe they are the same and how that might shape their interactions with the Lost.
Mages come up a lot in this book, and I love how every time it comes up, the refrain is, Changelings are really tired of mages asking them about this.
Yeah. I think you had made the point in a previous episode that Lost connects much more to the other games. I'm not really sure that I wanted to, but given that the line was limited, I guess it made sense. Like, if they only thought they were doing a handful of books, they kind of had to connect it to the ongoing ones. But, yeah.
I do favor the first interpretation. I think it makes sense.
Yeah.
It also is a preview of what we'll get in second edition, where the Gentry really are, in a way, just manifestations of their realm. Though in first edition, it's just a theory.
But the correct one.
Yes, obviously. Next, we get the nature and origin of the true Fae. What can I really say? This is a rehash of theories we got in Autumn Nightmares, right, just in better detail. So, to summarize, the Fae might be demons or fallen angels. They might be aliens from another dimension beyond Arcadia. Or, this one seemed like a weird take, they are infants whose dreams have reshaped Arcadia and then themselves into monsters. I feel like there should be more theories on what the true Fae are. So I continue to be disappointed in these sections.
The last one there, I had so many questions. Like, that raised so many more questions than it answered. But I did, some of these were expanded a little bit more, at least. The alien one in particular had a bit about how Arcadia is not their homeland. It's just the interface between their homeland and Earth. And it reminded me of a particular Star Trek The Next Generation episode with aliens that set something up like that. So, yeah.
I'd be more generous to the book if this was the first one that had introduced the concept. And I'll say that a lot of stuff that comes up in this book is going to be expanding on stuff from other books and just phrased better.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about the explaining the strangers, the perspective on the other supernaturals?
Yes. So this is broken up by game line, the other 4 games that hitherto existed. With vampires, it says they rarely interact with the Fae, but since both congregate in cities, it happens. From the Fae perspective, they might be either ancient and deadly fetches, like those devourers we talked about, made from human corpses, who turned to feeding on mortals when they finished off their changeling. They might be a lost darkling kith. They might be mortals permanently touched by the gentry equivalent of the Twilight world where the ghosts live. So sort of as the lost have been shaped by Arcadia, this space of life and chaotic change, the vampires, in theory, have been shaped by this place of stillness and stasis, which is a nifty theory, but I thought to myself, that kind of falls apart if you believe in reincarnation, doesn't it? But yeah. Or possibly a goblin bargain gone wrong, which is maybe the most dreaming aligned one. It's like the red cap prodigal origin story.
I think you can use made a bad mistake in the goblin market to explain anything. Yeah. It's the a wizard did it of Chronicles of Darkness.
Well, we'll get to wizards. But before them, we have the werewolves. There's a note here that lunacy doesn't affect changelings either, which is an important note to bear in mind. But the Lost believe that the Uratha might be carriers of a lycanthropic disease. So the Lost kind of steer clear of them because they're wary about things like forced changes for obvious reasons. They might be hedge beasts or hedge beast mortal crossbreeds. Or they might be hounds of the wild hunt, given how they seem to disappear into the shadow, which the changelings mistake for the hedge. Really, all of these lead to best avoided. And I haven't really done much with Werewolf the Forsaken. I don't know if you have, but
I ran a campaign.
The shadow/Umbra equivalent, I don't know if you can speak to how like or unlike the hedge that is.
The shadow is very different from the hedge. It's much more closer to the dreaming from Changing the Dreaming in the sense that it reflects what is going on in the mortal world. So it's a real dimension, but everything is made out of symbols. I can see why changelings might get confused because to some extent the hedge does also map to the mortal world. And they, more to the point, suggest the shadow might be an Arcadian realm, perhaps because of how weird it is. And all of that makes sense. I was not very excited overall about the werewolf theories, especially the idea that they share origins with hedge beasts, which, let's keep in mind, it's like cats and dogs that just get intelligent while they're in the hedge. They didn't even bring up the idea that werewolves might be, like, connected to briar wolves, which is the obvious one.
Obviously, yeah. It's a corner of the lore that I'm not particularly interested in. Following that, we have the mages. Similar with the lunacy thing, the Fae count as sleepwalkers against will workers, so vulgar magic isn't as much of a problem. Changelings give mages a wide berth, regardless. Options for the rumors about them are that they are descendants of the gentry or of the rare fertile changelings who have studied how to access the power of their heritage. Or they might be proof that even in the mortal world, reality is flexible, just less so than in the hedge. Maybe the mages have figured that out, and maybe they need to be stopped as a result, lest their continued flexing of reality in the mortal world allows the keepers to more easily access it and steal more humans. Or it could just be that they are what they are. They're witches and wizards. They're, fairy tale beings, so...
Of all the ones listed here, the mages are my favorite. The idea that they're just witches is pretty funny.
Yeah.
The concept that the mortal world is flexible reality is really cool, and it's important to remember this section says changelings are probably wrong about all of their theories on other supernaturals, but hey, they could be right, and I think you could have a lot of fun if you decided that one is true.
Mm-hmm.
And the last one, first one, the idea that they're fae-blooded mortals. What a nice connection to Changeling, the dreaming, and all the fan stuff about mages doing fairy magic. I just think it's cool.
That's like the second edition write-up for the mages in the prodigal section that gives the little tale about the children descended from the stars, which is one of my favorite pieces of Changeling writing. That's what it makes me think of. So, last but not least, the Prometheans. They are unlikely to meet a changeling, but the two of them are maybe a bit more likely to come to understand each other on each other's own terms, which I think is a nice note to have. The Lost believe that they could be either variations of fetches or alchemical elementals. I kind of hoped for a little bit more, like...
Everybody else gets at least 3. The
Yeah.
Prometheans get just the 2, and both of them are like... They're just, like, sad and wrong. Like, oh, man.
Yeah. And I mean, any kind of Changeling Promethean crossover, they could have so many conversations about the nature of the soul and identity and everything. Missed opportunity. But overall, the Lost seem to conceptualize the supernaturals. I mean, much like in Dreaming, it's through their own experience. They understand it in terms of their own ideas about how the universe works. And yet they're generally not conceived of as like distant and certainly not friendly relations in the way that sometimes they're presented in Dreaming. So
it's a great section. It's showing things from the perspective of a single game line, rather than wholesale buying in the perspective of a different game line, helps reinforce the themes of the game line that we're talking about. So definitely worth a read. What did you think about that sidebar?
Which one? There's so many.
Oh,
the what's for dinner?
Yeah, what's for dinner?
It was weird. Yeah, I guess it's useful. I mean, we get the notes about like hallucinatory fey blood for vampires and flesh tainted with mad resonance for werewolves. Don't feed on the true fey. I guess those work as crossover mechanics. I think what I would have wanted a little bit more was kind of the inroads into deeper lore. So if you're a changeling and you do meet mages and you do hang out with them and study their ways, eventually you'll probably learn a little bit more truth rather than just rumor. So kind of seeing that arc of development I thought would have been nice. I didn't really need it though because I don't do crossover much, but that's what we got instead.
Oh, fair enough.
So that's lore about the types of supernaturals. What about the magic itself?
The magic itself, the twisting of the weird. They've got some great headers in this book, don't they?
I should briefly point out, because I don't think we mentioned, that the authors for this were Jess Hartley, John Sneed, Travis Stout, and Charles Wendig. I don't know if they divided it up like one chapter each, but whoever wrote this one, good job. I mean, all of them, good job, but, you know.
What a beautiful sentiment, which is why it's really sad that this is why then I have to say, I didn't like the twisting of the weirds opening section. It asks the question about, why does fairy magic work in the real world? Which I never really thought of as a question. And they don't give us any solid answers. They just ask a lot more questions. Then it mentions that the common elements of fairy magic are time, fate, nature, and emotions. I didn't find that useful. But I did get some fun out of reading about altering magic for players who want to add optional rules that add complexity to changeling magic. It opens with a sidebar about how every changeling's magic has a unique feel to it, informed by what they've learned, how they learned it, what their kith and seeming are.
Not unlike Unleashings.
Yeah, that's a good point. We get into the magic of true names, and we both had some thoughts on this, but I'll start with what the book says. Again, these are all optional systems. Possessing a person's true name makes magic much easier to work on them. The options are 1. A person's true name always counts as a contract's catch. Nice. 2, the target cannot resist contract rules. Wow, that's strong. 3, saying a person's true name inflicts their own weird as a penalty on contracts against you. I like that. And 4, including your true name in a pledge gives you extra benefits, but costs you willpower dot if you breach it. This is really not that different from oaths and corporal vows. So, sure. Additionally, if you decide that the magic of true names works like this, you have to consider some changes to things about the world. First off, they suggest that no magic can define a true name just because it's a game and that would make it way too easy to do really powerful things. 2, a changeling's true name is made of their legal name when abducted, combined with their quote-unquote pet name given to them by their keeper. Creepy. A mortal's true name, which I want to talk about in a second, is their birth name. We'll come back to that. Supernatural's true names are their birth names and the names they're now known by combined. Okay. And alternatively, to all of this above, a true name might be something weird or abstract, which is always known to the person, even if only subconsciously. A final note is that mortals can change their true name with trivial ease. They don't explain what that means. Right. But changelings require a ritual and spending a dot of willpower. Overall, I think the system is interesting, not one I would use, but I think we both take beef with the idea that a mortal's true name is their birth name, and I gotta tell you, as a trans woman, it sure ain't.
I'll put out there that I think the reason why they said mortals change their true names with trivial ease is because whoever wrote this thought that it's trivially easy to change your legal name. And I'll just leave that where it is. I think that speaks volumes.
The dagger in my heart. Yeah.
But given all of the sort of ridiculous benefits that you get in Dreaming C20 for learning someone's true name, this pales in comparison. I think the first 4 items that you listed, that's kind of in line with what I'd like. And I would want them to be mutually exclusive, not all 4.
Oh God, agreed. Next, we have the Touch of Arcadia. This is pretty simple. It's just a pair of rules for changing how easily fairy affects changelings in the mortal world. The first rule makes it easier or harder to affect a changeling with contracts based on their clarity rating. And the second one just gives unensorcelled mortals an innate resistance to change. I, again, wasn't too wild about it.
Banality. Excuse me. To be honest, I was surprised that this kind of thing wasn't in the core rules. I also, as sort of a meta commentary, I wonder if at this point in the line they had gotten enough pushback from aggrieved Dreaming fans who didn't like Lost that they started trying to fold in more systems that approximated bits of Dreaming. Because that's, when I read this, I was like, okay, clarity is just banality now.
Oh my God.
I'm painting with a broad brush, but that's sort of the feel that I had.
I like it. I like it a lot. After that, we get the Wheel of the Years.
Yay!
Oh boy, this is quite a bit. This alternate rules for making the seasons more meaningful. Gotta say, little weird this isn't in the book about seasons.
Yeah.
Opens with a discussion of making seasons static and being granular about when changeovers happens, then gets into the new rules. Yeah, all of these can be mutually exclusive. And they say, if you decide you want to include all of these, seasons are going to define your character more than seeming or kith.
Your entire game, really.
Oh yeah, really. Let's start off with the first one, which is you gain the 8 again on literally all rolls, including magic, when your court is in power. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, 8 again by itself isn't great shakes, but having that on every single roll.
Every roll. All roll
good.
For 3 months, give or take.
While you get that benefit if your court is in power, there's another rule that says when you're in the adverse season, so if it's summer but you're a winter courtier, then you get a -1 penalty on all of your actions, which is really bad to have.
Yeah.
There's an idea that changelings must spend a year in a new court to gain its benefits, so you can't just hop between courts to avoid penalties or keep good stuff. And if you do so, another optional rule says lose all court goodwill when you shift court. Ouch! On top of that, we get a system that suggests, hey, what if court will required more dots to award any bonuses or contracts? Really emphasizing that your own court is what's going to matter. Mm-hmm. Then we get everybody in a court gains the monarch benefits. During season, if you're at 1 or 2 dots, or the whole year if you're at 3 dots. The monarch benefits are these little fringe benefits you get if you are the ruler of a court. They're not overwhelming. They're things like being able to harvest glamour more easily, but it's nice. The last 2 things are, 1, anything that disrupts the court cycle, including things like living in my home city of Phoenix, Arizona, violates the contract of keeping the Fae at bay, and they don't really explain that in any better detail.
It's like, did they even read Winter Masks? It's like the whole
thing. Like, you can't. That's the only one I would definitely ignore, because that would be devastating. Yeah. And finally, I love this as much as I'm terrified by the concept. Your seasonal affiliation is automatically determined by the season in which you escape Arcadia. Wow.
Yeah.
Would you use any of this stuff, Puka?
I honestly wasn't wild about these, especially the ones that kind of determine player behavior. They also include Seelie Unseelie in here, so it's like, oh, another Tilted Dream.
Oh, yeah.
They also list the cross-quarter days as the 5th, and my inner pagan screamed. I think the ones that I would be most likely to use are the narrative ones about how, like, changing courts is seen as kind of taboo, and you kind of have to work to re-earn goodwill. I might include those sort of amped up mantle benefits a little bit. Definitely not the 8 again roll. Definitely not the -1 on dice pools.
I would use this in a game where something was really wrong with the seasons, and that was the plot of the game, that these things are happening, and you need to figure out how to stop it because it's only getting worse.
I like that.
Did you like the Hedgebound, though?
Oh, well, all right. So the Hedgebound section reminds us that the hedge isn't always a trigger for a changeling's trauma, so you do have options to play it up in game. So some of the suggestions they give here are, you can have changelings sense glamour, so basically kenning. They point out that low glamour feels like a kind of hunger or thirst. Humans can't be harvested for glamour as an optional change. Instead, you can gain glamour from goblin fruits or trifles rather than using them for their purpose. You lose 1 glamour per day outside the hedge and gain 1 each day inside it, plus an extra 1 for every 4 hours inside a hollow, so they've recreated freeholds. You can also gain glamour by, is it destroying a token, I think? Points equal to its level.
Any goblin fruit or trifle can be reaped for 1 glamour instead of ordinarily consumed, and reaping a token takes all of its glamour but destroys it.
So, Dross. They've recreated Dross.
Also, a good time to point out that the point of most of this section of Hedgebound is this is an optional rule if you want to make the changelings more connected to the hedge.
Yeah, and also just kind of ramp up the glamour throughput cycle, as it were. There's also notes here about creatures with a glamour rating can be reaped for glamour, as can the hedge itself, but if you fail when you try to do so, it will cost you glamour, which leads to cycles of hunger and predation, which I actually thought was kind of interesting.
I liked it too, and also, when you do it, it does attract the attention of predators in the hedge, because somebody who's in a spot where they need to reap glamour is probably somebody who's a little vulnerable.
Yep. And when your glamour gets too low, you get a strong compulsion to reap. Because if you don't get that glamour, you start starving to death.
To make it worse, you can add the amount of glamour in the victim as a penalty to resist this compulsion.
Yeah. And all of this together, so this is like a lot. I think it's 14 separate points, like Woodrow Wilson. So yeah, all of this together kind of creates a primal glamour ecology, if I can call it that. Strong echoes of vampire. Like, the lose 1 per day is straight out of Vampire, in my estimation. I don't remember if Requiem does the same thing, but Masquerade certainly does.
Yeah, you do lose 1 point every time you wake up.
Yeah. But like the last section, there is a helpful reminder that introducing these will shift the theme of a chronicle from being human interaction focused to face centric. And then I was like, hang on, wait, what human focus? Beyond feeding off emotions to get glamour, I think I pointed out when we went through the core book, I was like, humans are not in this book at all. So anyway.
I think they're just making the point that if you make these changes, then changelings have a much stronger incentive to spend their time in the hedge as opposed to the mortal world. Yeah. I find the idea itself interesting, but this feels more like something I'd enjoy as like a flaw on an individual changeling rather than something I would apply to an entire campaign.
And that's kind of the same way I feel about it in Dreaming too. Like the irony of Changeling the Dreaming not delving very far into the dreaming, but then people who run games love just doing dreaming quests and everything. I tend not to. I tend to like it grounded in the autumn world. But yeah. So overall, this chapter, I liked the deep dive into lore, but I don't know how often it would come up in a game unless you're doing specific crossover. And then the additional rules, the way they're presented jives with how I like to present those. So they are optional, modular, and generally not mutually exclusive. So there's ones that I can see myself using here and there, and I like having the sort of pick and choose. Interestingly, despite them calling that whole section altering magic, few of them had to actually do with altering magic, like contract mechanics. So that was like, oh, okay. But yeah, like I said, I feel like a lot of these maybe came out of trying to throw more bones to the dreaming audience. I don't know if I necessarily want those realignments, though. I mean, it's lost, so does it need to be true?
I feel like it's altering magic in the sense that changing take a very broad concept of what their magic is, rather than just contracts itself.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think that's what they're getting at here.
Anything else about this chapter before we carry on to chapter 2?
No, I'm really curious to see what you think about Pledges and Dreams.
Oh, I've got thoughts. First, we get some Miami metal plot. Grandfather thunders in Rosethorn's dream. Whee! Chapter 2, Bound in Dreams. And the font once again embiggens itself for reasons unknown. So yes, this chapter is on some of the more general magical things the Lost can do, and we start with pledges. This chapter highlights how the bound word is at the heart of Fey magic, literally, in the lore of what contracts are, and that supernatural promises are regularly, quote, made, manifest, and modified every single day in Changeling society. They mention the dangers of breaking a vow, but also the social benefits of having them. You get allies, you might get glamour, might get protection, so they're useful and powerful. Getting into the wording of these, one must be careful. So something that we saw before, which I quite liked, and which they explore more in depth here, is the difference between traditional and modern wording for a pledge. Traditional is more certain to have been carefully crafted over time, but maybe too formal or flowery. If you're trying to get a mortal involved, they may be like, this is weird, you're getting me to like say weird arcane language. So modernizing it using contemporary terms might make it more appealing to mortals, but if you try to reword, especially if you try to reword on the fly, you might introduce an accidental loophole. So gotta be careful with that. And in terms of being careful, one of my favorite concepts in the entire book is right here, which is that when you do need to introduce variations for specific circumstances, or when the traditional wording doesn't quite fit the needs that you have, like you have to change the duration or whatever, you can get a pledge smith to help you out, to fine-tune the words. And I read this and I was like, I now want a pledge smith character. That is my next goal.
In my Lost campaign, I've had a couple of characters whose whole deal was to talk with characters about being careful what you say and being careful how you phrase a pledge. So yeah, I'm 100% behind that.
There's also a bit here about how they can shift organically over time or from region to region, like with different cultures. Some of them are rooted in non-European lore. And I think that's a really good opportunity for doing cool literary research. Like if you look at fairy tales from around the world and you see the different formulas in the text, like the way that tales in different parts of the world start with phrases other than once upon a time and end with things other than happily ever after, I find it fascinating to like dig into all of the little turns of phrase like that and the origins. So go out there, players, do some research, craft those pledges.
Though, speaking of crafting pledges, it mentions that changelings often use tricky wording, and I really wish it gave us some examples of what that meant.
Yeah.
I find it frustrating, especially because with the emphasis upon how important the wording is, I often think that the wording for the pledges they give us are clunky, even with the modern ones. And I gotta tell you that I often do not feel like the pledges do what the mechanics suggest. Like, I would often not have fully guessed what the effects are based upon them.
Yeah. We then get some examples of less equal pledges, because not all pledges are equal. This part, I think I had the most trouble with, like, kind of hashing it out in my head what was going on. Can you cover this? Can you explain these one-sided pledges, Fletch?
I had a similar issue. So, you have a concept of a one-sided pledge, where only one person is making the pledge. This is typically something like, I will not rest until I hunt down the privateer who's been kidnapping our courtiers. However, for all that a changeling might say that, it doesn't mean anything unless you have some way of binding it. And in order to bind it, you must have a witness. Although witness is technically bound to the pledge, but doesn't have any obligations, they're just a stand-in for the weird. They're symbolic. You need to have a witness. The other distinction is that a one-sided pledge must be an oath or a corporal pledge. So you're typically swearing upon your name or the name of your keeper or something that's valuable to you.
Couldn't your witness also be your corporal focus?
I'll be honest, Puka, I'm not sure they understood what they were saying when they wrote this one. When they get into the example, I half thought the witness had to be that. But yes, it sounds like the witness can be the person being pledged upon, which I really hope you tell them that before you make them the witness. Otherwise, they might have some concerns halfway through the pledge that you're making. But yeah, I like the idea of the one-sided pledge, but I do think it's a little clunky.
Yeah. And there's stuff about like religious pledges and joint pledges, which just seems like two one-sided pledges rather. A lot of this was kind of just,
There's a final note before we get to goblin pledges, which I really want to talk about, which is that mages can mess with pledges, but it's very difficult because the weird's like, no! Mine.
Yep. So yeah, goblin pledges, which are optional. You don't have to include them in your game. But they rely on the goblin vow merit. And the way you do this is that you choose a specific purview, such as ravens or dusk or cash, and you can make one-sided pledges around that purview, usually asking a boon of the weird related to it. There's an innate sanction of task total plus 1, which confused me a little bit, but thankfully they give an example here where somebody who's like a changeling who's fleeing her pursuers swears a goblin pledge to the dark of the night or something. And she's like,
darkness, yep.
Yeah. So she's like, if you hide me from my pursuers, I'll break every streetlight I see for the next month. And the knight does so, and she starts breaking streetlights. But then when she fails to break streetlights before that time is up, she gets the curse levied on her. And I guess it's one level higher in intensity than whatever the boon she got.
I don't know about you, but I love goblin pledges. It adds a new dimension to what changelings can do. It's spontaneous magic. It feels like you're doing a spontaneous contract. It adds to the lore and the vibes of the setting. And it lets you do some wild things with changeling magic that you otherwise could not do. It's so cool.
Yeah, no, they're good. So after all of this, there's a system for alternate pledge crafting, which I think is for people like me who kind of need it to be simplified. Honestly, though, I don't know that it actually made it that much simpler. There's just
I don't think so.
There's just fewer options. There's fewer things to like align in tables to make sure they balance out to 0. So the process is basically choose tasks and invest 1 to 3 glamour, depending on how intense those tasks are. Then determine sanctions, and those cost another 1 to 3 glamour. Choose the duration, which is from 1 to 6 glamour, sometimes with a little bit more on top of that if it's like eternal. Add all the costs up, and all parties must spend at least 1 glamour. There are some examples of how one of these might be constructed and broken, in which case the weird kind of reacts all at once. And then for multiple person pledges, such as those formed by motleys, you just have everybody pay an equal portion of the cost.
There's also simplified pledges, which is just, hey, you make pledges, they just can't do supernatural benefits.
Yeah, but what's the fun in that? Overall, though, it seems like a lot of glamour for not a lot of benefit in this system. I don't know. Like, compared with the base system in the core book, what were your thoughts about this?
I thought this was a fun way of giving you an alternative to worrying about the balancing out the numbers back and forth. Just figure out how much glamour you want to spend on something and be done with it. I've only played 2E, so I can't really speak to this, but I'd probably try out the core system first for constructing a pledge, and I could see myself switching over to this system if I got to a point where I'm like, I don't care. I just want to make a cool deal, and then you just tell me how much magic it costs. That's fine.
Kind of like in Dreaming. Yeah, I sort of want to create a Pledgesmith just so I can practice mastering that minigame, because I think I would need to read through this several times. I want to like it more. It's just I kind of bounce off some of these systems. There are 3 samples after that: the Fostering Oath, the Brotherhood in Arms, and the Penitence Pledge. They're fine. I liked the Brotherhood in Arms one.
It was nice. The gave you some decent benefits. But yeah, I don't really have anything to add to that one. Nice to have more pledges, I guess.
Yeah. But then we move on to talking about dreams for the Oneiromancers.
Oh, yes.
Mostly, I would say this is generally storyteller-facing advice. And in particular, they say with dreams, when you're working them into a game, think about what you want to convey, what information, and then backfill in the dream details towards that, which I think is sensible.
Now, the stuff about storyteller advice is mostly in the back half of this one. The front end is just a more extended and nuanced examination of the various types of dreams and what changelings can do in them, which I think is very player-focused. And then we get a little bit of crunch about more stuff you can do in some of those dreams.
I would politely disagree a little bit. I do think that there's kind of both storyteller and player-facing in the front part of this section. Because, I mean, you have, like, this kind of dream is good for storytellers to do this, and if you're a player, you can do this mechanic for X.
Okay, that's a good point.
It's balanced. It's got a good mix. Like, this might be my favorite section in the book. So. It's
strong. It also has some of the best artwork. See page 46 for some beautiful dream imagery.
I have that in my notes, yes. Best art piece in the book. Well, although 48 is also really good, but incredibly creepy.
Oh, boy.
Incredibly unsettling. So yeah, the different kinds of dreams are sketched out, and, well, really more than sketched out here. So each of these kind of discusses what an Oneiromancer might be able to glean, like how it might be useful from a player's perspective, and what the storyteller might be able to present in the context. So for a recurring dream, you can get a sense of the dreamer's true colors or things that they're subconsciously aware of, things that are kind of reinforced within their psyche. If you are a character and you analyze that dream, you can get a bonus on social rolls to determine their mood or intentions for the next week. So you kind of get a sense of who they are from seeing what has the most substance in their recurring dreams.
I love it.
Yeah, it makes sense, like. With memory dreams, those can obviously be good for investigations. If someone dreams about what they saw happen, you can roll wits plus occult plus weird to better parse the weird dream logic, because obviously it'll be very heavy in that.
Including how much of the memory is true.
Yeah.
Super important if you're like, okay, did they actually get attacked by a bear?
Yep. The wish fulfillment one I thought was really cool too. So they're very personal, grounded in the dreamer's vice and or virtue and or morality system. Heavy symbolism, which can provide deep insights into those traits, as well as any derangements that they have. Again, wits plus occult plus weird to parse all of that out.
I also love that it just says, look, wish fulfillment dreams are just a fun place to adventure. why not just have a session or two in there?
Yeah. Sometimes players can read too much into them, too. Similarly, talk about reading too much into things with prophetic dreams.
Oh boy.
They can be really good for a storyteller to kickstart a story arc, but you don't want to overuse them. And it is difficult, admittedly. I say this from experience, probably success as often as failure in trying to hit the right amount of vague and cryptic, because you want your players to like catch something, but not be totally baffled by those.
Yeah, I liked it. I also like that if you try to mess with a prophetic dream, it's bound to backfire. It stops being prophetic.
Mm-hmm. Similar to wish fulfillment with nightmares, instead of going on like a little fantastic mini adventure, you can go on a horror mini adventure. But I think the more interesting angle here is talking about them as kind of the inverse of a wish fulfillment dream. It's what you don't want to come to pass. So I think that's also worth exploring. There's a bit in here too about if you have like a particularly intense action scene within a nightmare, that might be worth experience points. You might need, I think it's wits plus weird to escape. So lastly, we get shadow dreams, which covers dreams in relation to other supernaturals. This is just a whole wall of mechanics, and unless there's anything you want to call out as noteworthy, I don't really feel like getting into it. So
I'm just going to make 2 points.
Go for it.
One is you really do not want to hop into a vampire's dreams because they're almost all bad and very confusing. And that Prometheans sometimes have dreams brought on by the divine fire. You do not want to try messing with those ones because they are extremely powerful.
Fair points.
And the only ones that I think they're probably the only ones that feel very real because they come from an external source for the Prometheans.
So there aren't really any new dream weaving systems here, just kind of reminders of existing stuff. It is more focused on interpretation and how does this fit into the beats of a story. But along with my Pledgesmith, I also now want to make some kind of dream analyst spy character, because I think that could also be really fun.
The head of the Spring Court in my Changeling the Lost campaign runs the Dreaming Demon, which is a speakeasy bar / brothel where they do a neuromancy to help people, both including wayward mortals and struggling changelings, work through their issues by going into their dreams and studying them. It's a lot of fun, and I've done it for some of the PCs in my game.
Beautiful. Well, on the subject of interpreting them, we also get this toolkit for dream imagery, which
so good.
It does recommend like, oh, you should really look at the works of Jung and New Age manuals, which I guess is better than like pointing people towards Freud. But I would actually like to call out, when we did Guild Book Sandman, there's a link, which it's like a 90s website that's long defunct, but you can pull it up on the Wayback Machine. And it was just people submitting their dreams to this, I think, psychologist at MIT or something. Huh. It's really a good resource for like all of these weird images that you have to like figure out their meaning. And obviously you can keep your own dream journal as well. But yeah.
The section's good if you're like, I am really stuck on how to do dream imagery. It gives you a lot of dream imagery 101 stuff. And you know what? I think that's fine.
Yeah. The part that I actually loved, well, so I want to call out one gripe and then one thing I loved. So the gripe, they kind of go through all the different types of symbolism, like what do animals mean? What do body stuff mean? What does it mean if people show up? But with colors in particular, they lay out like, oh, here's what green usually signifies. Here's what red usually signifies. And those tend to have very significant cultural differences, which I don't think they really attended to here. Like, there are countries where you wear white to a funeral and you never wear white to a wedding and things like that. So it just kind of bearing that in mind, I think, is important. However, what I loved is there's a separate section for the symbolism of virtues and vices in the context of dreams. And this was hands down my favorite part of the chapter. Each one gives notes on what like each virtue and vice looks like in terms of wish fulfillment and nightmares, sometimes both for vices, as well as notes about phase-specific elements and some archetypal symbols. That alone makes this book worth it for me. I think that's hugely useful. But as the book notes, all of this is debatable. All of this is complex and cultural and individual, and ultimately use what works for your story. while also bracing yourself for players to misinterpret everything.
Maybe the best thing about why you should do neuromancy is it's really cool.
It is. And it's a very Fae-specific way to pursue a storyline in all sorts of different ways, because you can use oneiromancy for getting information about something. You can use it to literally pursue an enemy into the dreams of somebody else. You can connect it to the hedge and a character's own story in different ways. What does a fetch dream about? Do fetches dream of electric hobgoblins? These are the questions that I want answered. If you need to lead players more directly, I would also suggest putting the correct take on a dream analysis in the mouth of an NPC. That's a surefire way to make sure they get what you want them to get.
Mentor characters are great for that kind of thing.
Yeah. Lastly, we have a story. This surprised me.
I didn't expect them to include a bespoke story as part of this section. This was a treat.
Yeah, I actually don't want to spoil it because I would like to run this. How about, do you mind if I just read the opening, the little fiction vignette?
Please.
So here's what we get. You stand in a field of grain, wheat or rye, maybe barley, you can't be sure. In the distance up ahead, the field fades into a thick tangle of thorny briars as high as a castle wall. You repress a shudder. The hedge. No, not exactly. There is a gate set in that wall, so wrapped in brambles and vines you nearly miss it. A man stands before those gates with the air of someone expecting something. You can't see his face, but he is dapperly dressed in a black suit and bowler hat, holding a bright red umbrella like a walking stick. As you stand, transfixed by the towering gates of Fairy, you feel a touch on your arm. The man who has drawn your attention is dressed in a fine, expensive suit, but it's rumpled and torn, and there is a gleam of madness in his eyes. Burned into his forehead is a livid red scar in the shape of an ornate letter T. He points wordlessly, compelling your gaze to follow. A line of people, men and women, young and old, walk out of the field and into a looming Victorian building set incongruously amid the crops. As each one walks into the building, they vanish, swallowed up as if they had never been. And with every vanished person, those terrible, thorny gates creak open a little wider. You try to muster a cry of protest, but all that came out was a sputtering hiss, like wet leaves thrown onto a campfire. The dark man in the dapper suit turns to regard you. And you sit bolt upright in bed, screaming, drenched with sweat despite the chill that makes your bones ache. Chest heaving for breath, you climb out of bed and stumble to the bathroom. You won't be sleeping again anytime soon.
What a way to begin an adventure for the players.
So good. So yeah, you all have that prophetic dream, and then things happen.
We will not spoil that for you.
Yeah.
So good.
I guess, like, for the sake of content warning or content information, it includes like a mental asylum. It includes things about epidemics of shared madness in history. It includes a local indie band if you're not okay with that. There's a nice mix of dream analysis, possibly pledges, social challenges, lots of possible hooks, and hooks for other stories that you can hitch onto it. So I think, like, why wasn't this the one shot, the quick start? I guess it hadn't been written yet. I guess that's why. But I could definitely see using this.
Yeah, it's a good read. If you're this far in the book, you might as well read this and consider using it.
Yeah. But that's the chapter.
Yeah. Overall, I thought this chapter was... It starts off weak with the pledges. Overall, I really thought those were a mixed bag. But then the moment we hit dreams, it's amazing.
Yeah, for sure. And it's useful for dreaming as well, Changeling the Dreaming, and Oneiromancers and that, even beyond what's in like Dreams and Nightmares.
Sure, we don't get a lot of study of dreams in Changing the Dreaming, so for characters who want to use a neuromancy, this would be a fantastic section to read just for that.
Mm-hmm. Because it's mostly narrative advice, and because so much is facing the storyteller as well as the player, it is portable in that way. I think the only thing I would add beyond this from like a story design perspective is that to remember each element can be teased out and remixed with others. So like a dream or nightmare doesn't have to be just one kind. It can be wish fulfillment and nightmare and prophetic, like all at once. Or you can draw on symbolism with multiple layers of meaning or mix and match. And I can't underscore enough the be flexible piece. Like if there's one thing I've learned from running dreams in games, you have to be ready to pivot. So, yeah. But it's great. I mean, this was brilliant.
I have so many more thoughts on dreams, but I feel like that's worth an episode in itself.
Add it to the list.
Add it to the list.
So, Chapter 3.
The Weird.
We also have a little story about Jack Tallow.
Yeah, I didn't make much sense of this. What do you think of this story?
I guess he's trying to make a pact to get some Spring Court goodwill or something to learn the Eternal Spring contract. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Something.
But this chapter itself is exciting because the back half of it is where you get all of the crunch that everybody's going to flip to first in the book and look at the most often. And look, we all have that urge. And it's a good, fair urge to have, and this book will definitely deliver on that. But first, we get some extended treatments of Changeling theories about Glamour, the Mask, Clarity, and Iron. And then after that, we'll talk about the fun stuff with merits, flaws, and contracts.
Yeah. It is kind of the kitchen sink chapter, I would say. But a lot of it, too, I mean, I like fluff. I like crunch, but I like fluff, too. And there are all of these sort of little fiction vignettes that show slices of Changeling life where this magic stuff comes to play. And I really appreciate that.
We open up with a extended discussion of Glamour. We get theories about why the True Fae are interested in Glamour, which again was talked about in a previous book, but is talked about here in more detail and better. These theories include the True Fae need Glamour in order to be real. They've made a pact with every emotion except for contentment.
Love that.
Love it. The Fae need Glamour in order to have free will. Otherwise, they are just automatons that regulate our world's metaphysics. Spooky? I like this. I like this theory. I don't think it jives very well with some of the other stuff they suggest about the True Fae, but I think it's really cool. And finally, the Fae are Glamour, and they infect the mortal world with it so they can spread their will here. Nice and unsettling take.
Can I just say, I love that these theories are presented in character because they are each wild if you think on them for too long.
Oh my god, my favorite is definitely the second one about the free will story. That is so good. They do this a lot in Changeling the Lost, these little stories, and I recommend reading every single one of them. After that, we get some information about what Glamour feels like. Harvesting Glamour is always a rush, but harvesting is flavored by several things. The Changeling's unique magic, just what they are like, the personality of the person they're harvesting from, and the amount you harvest, which then leads into an optional system for, first off, feeling a drug high or hallucinations from taking in a lot of Glamour. We get an optional system for harvesting Glamour from dreams, which is already a thing you can do. This just makes it an extended role. We get some information about the refined taste of Glamour from a pledge, and a reminder that eating Glamour from goblin fruits has a quote-unquote pure taste. It's like, that raw Glamour just going down my throat. I'm eating those sugar cubes. This part was weird for me. We also know that supernaturals exposed to Glamour often have powerful reactions to seeing it. And finally, we get a discussion about how Glamour makes a changeling feel full or hungry, including optional rules for modifying dice pools and tracking by the Fae, plus the idea that having a lot of Glamour in one system makes a changeling hallucinate. I don't know if I would use these optional systems, but everything here so expands upon what Glamour is that I think it does a fantastic job of taking it from just a number on your character sheet to being a cool aspect of how you view your character.
Yeah, I agree that I don't know how many actual mechanical systems I would introduce, but everything around like sensory description or resonance, if I can use that term, that's something that I've used in dreaming games and probably also Lost games now that I think about it.
Yeah, even if you don't take any of the mechanics from here, just saying, hey, having a lot of Glamour feels like you're full, having it low feels bad. Taking a bunch from somebody who's feeling just generally depressed feels a lot different from taking a little bit from somebody who just had the best day of their life.
Or who's angrier than they've ever been.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of anger, I want to talk about the sad story that opens the section of The Mask. That little thing that keeps changelings connected to our world and yet in a way so distant from what they really are. It's the sad story of William the Warrior. Poor child, bullied as a kid, gets carried off into a gladiatorial arena in Arcadia where he's made to fight for his life. And against all odds, this kid becomes the arena champion, and he becomes like this terrifying, draconic warrior. Eventually, he escapes his bondage and returns to the real world. And now, this powerful warrior, he goes to show off to the people who bullied and tormented him. But they don't see the warrior. They just see the little kid they made fun of. And in that moment, he feels so disempowered that he can't do anything but suffer as the bullying resumes. This to me felt like something pulled directly from Changing the Dreaming and also added so much context to the Lost. What do you think about the story, Puka?
I was just sad. I think it was intended to generate the reactions that it did, for sure. But it points to, I guess in a way, because the mask is, the way that the mask and the mean are presented in the game, the way it is in the core book and the way I've seen people play it, which is granted limited, it doesn't really get as much emotional weight as it deserves. And I think this rectifies that. It really points to, here's what these two faces that you present signify to entire worlds of people. And in Dreaming, it's like you're kind of working with both all of the time. Whereas in Lost, you drop one, you put one up, you know what I mean? Like the mask is something that you take away and put back on. There's significance to that. There's meaning behind that. And I think this book kind of pushes people to take that more into account. That's sort of my thought on it.
I agree for no other reason than that story is going to stick with me.
Yeah.
The section does give us a more detailed examination of the mask. Very little of it's new information, so I'm just going to take some quick bullet points here. The mask persists post-mortem, so even when you die, people never get to see what you really looked like. Smell is the least obfuscated of all of the experiences that come through the mask. The mask is theorized to come from several things. I didn't think this was necessary, but it might just be a natural construct of glamour. It could be a parting trick of the true Fae. It could be, I like this one, the fragment of the changeling's soul, the wrapping around them as they bust through the thorns. So good. The final one is, or something sinister and unknown, tying together a global supernatural conspiracy, given that some other supernatural creatures have things similar to the mask.
I didn't read that as sinister. I just read that as, okay, they've added the mists.
There are a bunch of minor situations in which Immortal might be able to pierce the mask, such as maybe kids can see through it. And there's a note that sometimes supernaturals can pierce through the mask, but just like mages messing with dreams, it is very difficult to do so. It turns out that the weird and fairy do not like it when you try messing with them, so please do not.
Incidentally, on page 72, there's this random but amazing sidebar on managing clarity. I think it was meant to be a few pages later, but it's here in this section. And, well, yeah, I'll come back to that.
Any other thoughts before we go on to clarity?
I guess the only other thing that I wanted to call out is the flaws of the mask. Like, they point out repeatedly that sometimes little bits slip through one way or another, and it conforms to the changeling. So it is very personal. As your weird increases, though, it's like your true self starts kind of cracking the mask a bit. And all of this is separate from using sorceress means to create a firmer disguise. So the mask is not necessarily the only way that you can conceal your true identity.
It's a nice detail and a great way that you could show off in game the power skill of a certain character. Like if your changelings encounter like the Queen of Winter and she goes to help them out with something, somebody threatens them, and then suddenly the temperature in the area drops by several degrees.
Yeah, it's very cinematic in a way too.
Next, we get clarity, which I recall was something that neither of us were really fond of its presentation from the core book, and they do not do much to fix that here. Let's talk about it. The book claims that clarity does not equate to morality or quote-unquote sins.
Oh, really?
Well, they say that the breaking points reflect reminders of their durance, the caprice of the true fae, and the chaos of Arcadia. And I like the idea, but I gotta say, choosing to copy and paste verbiage from morality undermines it.
Yep.
What do you think, Puka?
I appreciate that they give us explanations and examples for really all of them. They're like, well, okay, here's why petty theft is a trigger. I'm still not here for it. What I do like is going back to that sidebar. You remember how I was griping about unexpected life events and what the hell am I supposed to do with that? They lay that out and they talk about the sort of nuance around handling those as a storyteller and when you would actually ask for a roll. I really appreciated that. I didn't realize before how victim blamey it felt, if that makes sense. Like they kind of say, you can have a breaking point if the unexpected life event is external, if your character could have stopped it, if it's an event that serves the story and any tragedy it causes isn't like one player's having to deal with all the tragedy. So they kind of give these guidelines which really enrich it and make it feel much less like, I don't know, like, oh, I guess you shouldn't have opened that door then. You know what I mean? It's a little bit more telling the storyteller to kind of take it easy with the breaking points. So that's good, at least. That was the bright spot.
I enjoyed conceptually that they pointed out even positive life events can mess with a changeling's perspective. But like you say, that's not on the changeling. That's just the nature of what they go through.
Right. You're playing a character in a role-playing game. Every session is going to have multiple unexpected life events. So there has to be some kind of line. And it is the responsibility of the storyteller to handle that gracefully and with aplomb, for sure.
If there was one thing I wish they would have changed about this system, it's that I wish they had introduced an alternate system that leaned into what they claim it's meant to reflect. Mm-hmm. Because they explain what it should be like, and I think it would be better to take the concept of what they're suggesting and then kind of ignore the actual example breaking points given to us in the core book.
I might do it as choose one breaking point for each level from a range of options, add more options to represent a range of durances, and maybe have the morality aspect be something along, I can't remember now which game it is. There's a game where it's like you choose, I think it's V5, where you choose like, I refuse to kill, I refuse to steal. Like you kind of choose your own commandments.
Yeah. V5.
And I think something like that could have balanced this well. So
agreed.
At least though, there is also a system to kind of help you buy it back up more easily if it falls, which was also a major sticking point I had before.
Yes.
Not very helpful of a system, but it's there.
Well, we get a two-part system. First, we get the system for raising clarity from 0, which requires therapy from somebody else. You can't do that, you're too far gone. Then a general therapy system that decreases the cost to buy up clarity. It's nice to have.
Yeah.
And finally, we get an optional system for other high clarity bonuses, such as seeing through illusions, and the inverse for low clarity. Not bad if you want to add in more dimension to clarity. That's all I have to say on that. Any other thoughts before we go on to Iron?
Let's carry on.
You know what? Do you want to take Iron? Because I think that this has been your bailiwick for a little bit.
Has it? Okay.
Oh, if not, hey, look, I'm going to jump right into it then.
Go for it, yeah.
All right. So after reiterating the basics of how Iron works, we get several stories for its origins. along with optional rules. So, first story, a contract torn asunder. A fairy prince made a bet with iron and lost, thanks to the intervention of an enslaved changeling. This uses the rules as normal because it reflects how things already work. Story number 2, the hope of man. Humans used to be tormented constantly by the supernatural. Then one day, they dug up iron. They made a deal with Iron to protect them against all supernatural threats, which Iron accepted because it's like, hey, I'm new in town. I could really use the work. This optional system gives several powerful new options to ward against or defeat any supernatural being by using Iron. And then finally, the Foe of All Unreason. Love that title. This suggests that iron works because it is the most non-magical substance on Earth. The optional system makes all supernatural magic affected by cold iron the same way as fey magic. Ephemeral entities, like ghosts, spirits, take aggravated damage from iron. And finally, using magic on hand-forged iron, which is the best kind, makes it into cold iron, and doing the same to cold iron makes it inert, as in doesn't have any special effects. Which one of these was your favorite of the 3 stories?
Honestly, the last one. There's all this kind of stuff swirling around nowadays about like, oh, well, now the Fey Bane should be plastic. And I'm like, just let it be iron. It's the Bane because it is the Bane, and there is no reason or explanation. It's just, that's the way it is. It's this boring metal.
I love it too. I'm betting then that we're aligned on the next part, which I think is fantastic. A discussion about the nature of iron. The book points out something. This is the thing that I was saying why I felt like you were already invested in this, because you already pointed out like what counts as iron in a world where steel is already at least 98% iron.
Yeah.
And the suggestion is, look, just forget the science and use common sense for what people think of as iron, because it's about the mystical association more than the chemical makeup.
Yeah, it's an elegant solution that's sure to put your local metallurgist into a tizzy.
Yeah, I mean, I personally love it, especially because we then get a list of things that typically count as iron, because why not? And it includes my favorite, iron skillets. And yes, we do get combat stats for all of these. Beautiful.
Perfect.
After that is a discussion of hand-forged iron, which boils down to it doesn't technically exist, but meteoric iron counts, and we get a system for forging it. I like this section, especially the back half of it. I thought this was good stuff to have for anyone who wants to deal more with iron in their game.
I have a note in here that something about the back half of it, they contradict some of the folkloric stuff that they just pointed to, but now that I'm looking, I can't actually tell what I was talking about. But, yeah.
After that, we've got merits, flaws, and contracts. And there's so many that we just going to talk about our favorites.
Yep. 30 new merits. Hot damn. So, favorites for me, Pledgesmith, because Pledgesmith, new goal.
Mm-hmm.
Profit circle. I have so many questions and ideas here. This is essentially your character has ensorcelled one or more mortals with a high level of psychic sensitivity. It's your psychic retinue, essentially. I feel like I could build an entire story around one character with that merit. So,
how fun.
I'm super into that. And the other one for merits I wanted to point to was Soul Sense, where you have some kind of like empathic connection to your fetch, just because I think that would deepen the fetch aspects of the game, especially if you have an antagonistic relationship. So you can feel each other's pain, that kind of thing.
No, I like that. For me, I got to start off by pairing gentrified bearing and fairy favor. The former makes people mistake you for one of the true fae, which is great until it's not. And fairy favor means that you have a little token you can invoke at any time to call down one deal from one of the true fae, which is awesome, but will get you in trouble if anybody realizes that you can do that. My other favorite is Arcadian Metabolism.
Oh, that was good.
Because, yeah, it's just... Goblin Fruit can already heal you. Goblin Fruit now will heal aggravated damage and more of any other kind of damage. And it has this cool drawback about how it messes with medicine rules to help you and how you now need the diet. This is the kind of thing I was talking about when I said I wouldn't want all changelings be dependent upon the hedge. But I love the idea of a character with this merit because it gives them a really cool benefit, but also a cool story drawback.
Yeah, no, that was a runner-up for me, for sure. I actually didn't like Fairy Favor, but that's only because it cost 3 dots for a one-time use, which I think is a bit steep. But it is very powerful, and it has a lot of interesting possibilities. So, we also get 8 new flaws. Any favorites among the flaws?
Yes. Manifest Mean, where people can see parts of what you actually look like, and in the worst way possible. True Tongue, which is going to force you to tell the truth. Hey, it's Bard's Tongue. It's back.
Yep.
And I probably wouldn't recommend anybody actually take Cannibal, but I gotta say, it's a pretty good example of how all the flaws in this section can have a major impact upon your character. And I think that's what flaws should do in this game. They're good.
Ditto for me, but with Glamour Addict. So... Yeah, I'm glad that we have this expansion of merits, as there are a lot of game and character options residing there, particularly in New World of Darkness. Like, merits do a lot of heavy lifting. And I think we had said before, like, I was surprised there weren't more merits in the last 2 books, so I'm glad that we got so many here. And speaking of so many... Yeah.
Oh, God. Contracts. I'm gonna bust through a summary of what they all are, and then we go into our favorites.
Does that
work for you?
I've got bustable summaries too, so if you need to tag out, just let me know.
Excellent. So the section opens with a brief discussion of what it's like to actually gain new contracts, and I love this. It involves meditations on a manifestation of the weird.
Yeah.
Then we get into the new ones. We get Contracts of the Forge, which allow you to rewrite reality, and the Hedge, in small ways, typically. Time, which gives you control over how time affects people, objects, and yourself. Moon gives you power over madness, which amounts to you now control the derangement system in this game. Contracts of Omen let you see into the past and future. Contracts of the Wild give you influence over the natural world. We also get a lot more goblin contracts, including some new subtypes. The Contracts of Sacrifice are special goblin contracts that permanently cost the changeling something. This includes Contracts of Goblin Fortune, which create a powerful blessing or curse at the cost of a willpower dot. And Goblin Transformation, which creates significant and often permanent changes. What are your favorites?
In terms of the buckets, Contracts of Hours, just because it's less fun than Chronos, but I love time wackiness, so that one. And Contracts of Omen, because it's basically soothsay, but I really like playing oracular characters, so any kind of contracts around perceiving these sort of non-mechanized aspects of a character's personality, or I don't know, with Omen you can like dig out their central trauma or look at an upcoming significant event in their future, things like that, and I love stuff like that. Goblin Contracts, the one where you tell truth from lies, that was brilliant. I think, though, you had also mentioned that you had thoughts about Contracts of the Moon, I think. That might have been on the Discord, but
yes.
That had serious dementation vibes from Vampire.
Yes, very much so. My thought is, I love it and it's problematic, because it inherently makes use of the derangement system, which is a questionable system to exist in the first place, because of the framing of neurodivergence in Chronicles of Darkness, and the conflation between mundane mortal experiences and the supernatural. So you need to play carefully if you're going to use something like the Contracts of the Moon, which involve inherently the derangement system. But it's also a very powerful system because it can radically alter the way that people think and act. and it is a very phased system. It's something where if I could modify it for second edition to eliminate the problematic elements, but keep the vibe of Fey whimsy, I would love to have it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
My favorite contracts, first off, I love some of the same ones you do. Side of Truth and Lies, so good. Vision of Strife from Omens for seeing a person's most traumatic moment.
Yeah.
Wow, that can change some things.
Which is like level 1, too.
Right? In time, I know you talked about how it's not as powerful as Chronos, but my friend, it has the best power. Leaping toward nightfall lets you punch somebody into the future.
No, I didn't say less powerful. I said less fun. Like, that one, yes, that one is absolutely good. But I just love Chronos for doing things like you can reverse causality or the perception of causality, which how you're supposed to actually run that in a game, I still haven't figured out, but I love it.
The other ones I like are trivial reworking. It's the classic make one object look like another, and it can even be functional. Then blood binding, which completely strips the target of all supernatural powers and glamour at the cost of your own. So you are about to get into a fight or have a very interesting time. Healing sacrifice completely heals a person, although I believe it costs you health levels.
Well, so, all right. So can we talk about these goblin ones for a second? Because I have a question.
Sure, what's up?
So the standard goblin contracts, I love all the drawbacks. The sacrifice ones, so most of them, all of the goblin fortune ones require you to sacrifice a dot of willpower. The transformation ones, some of those require that. Others require, I think there's one that takes resolve and one that takes stamina. And another one where you trade away your beauty to get a healthy relationship. And I'm like, how does that work? Like, how does your appearance work in the context of this game? And then slaying a target for giving up a dot of stamina, is that any killable target? I know it says like the true Fae are off limits, but what about like 1,000-year-old vampire? Can you just slay them?
That is maybe my favorite contract from the Goblin ones, by the way. So that is called the Fatal Transformation. And I gotta say, the Goblin contracts of transformation are misnamed because they don't really do a lot about transforming people. I guess transforming someone into a corpse is technically in the limits, but really. But yeah, no, it's ridiculously powerful. It instantly kills somebody at the cost of 1 dot of stamina, which
big deal.
I think you can just buy back. Yeah.
A lot of these, with the exception of probably that one, they feel not worth it. I like the idea of one changeling in a freehold knowing one of them. So it's like an NPC that you go to. It's like, oh, we got to go see old Tom. He's the one that knows that contract, what kills people. That's how I would use it in a story. The one that I really liked from among those actually is the level 5 Goblin Fortune, where you can bring back a Fey abductee. I thought that was a good story.
Oh, that was so... Oh.
Yeah.
That one hit my heart.
So overall, I'm really gratified by this chapter because I feel as though a lot of the things I've been griping about have at least been addressed. So there's a system to recover clarity more easily, fine. But I'm happy that there's more and more diverse merits. I think contracts for the Wizened to actually reshape objects were something that I had been surprised didn't exist yet, so those are here now. Seeing a lot of these costs in a row reminds me that Glamour and Lost, I would say, is much readier than in the old Dreaming.
Definitely.
And maybe that's why C20 players have gotten used to a much higher burn rate of Glamour. But yeah, overall, great crunch. And great framing of the crunch.
I agree. Overall, I think this is the strongest chapter. Whatever my quibbles might be with some of the overextensive detail or the talk about clarity, I think they do a great job of exploring concepts that are confusing and then giving players all the extra crunch you could want to keep your game going and expand your options.
Yeah, certainly the longest chapter. So then...
Chapter 4, From the Thorns.
Yes, we open with a changeling named Enkidu searching caves in the hedge for a hollow and escaping a killer ventriloquist dummy, like you do.
I think it's a great story. I have to say, I love this artist. This is also surprisingly horny-looking artwork for the context of what's going on here.
I thought you were going to say, I love this artist, I don't love this art, because I was ready to agree.
I do not think that the horny approach of having her just chest forward, breast exposed was the greatest move for the story to go along with this one. I would love to see more of the artist's work, and we will see it in the book, but I just don't think it really works for this picture, even though everything else about it is like overall great.
Yeah.
Cool cavern, like the dummy coming at her from behind. It's just her in the front.
It's the posing.
It's the wrong vibe.
Anyway, the Hedge. This is the chapter about it. One thing I should mention, this book has been pretty good about not doing the saying the same thing several times writing style, but then this page does it. Just the opening that kind of describes the Hedge the same way 3 times in a row. Anyway, so we start with the plant bits, and we learn about hedge sculpting.
I like hedge sculpting.
I like it too. I can see this being useful. The basic approach is you spend a glamour, you roll weird, and the reverse psychoactive hedge briefly yields to your touch so that it can be lightly sculpted using your actual hands. The barbs, etc., won't hurt you. There are also more advanced techniques, each with their own systems, wherein you can ensnare a target, you can hide behind some foliage, you can shape ladders, or you can fashion quick weapons. One thing that I really was thinking about going through the sort of exploration of the flora was pairing it with the hedge as it appears in different terrains bit that we got in Winter Masks, I think. That would generate some really cool permutations, I thought.
I liked this section because the core book has information about how changelings naturally change the hedge around them as their weird gets stronger, and how you can physically change it, but actually making a change requires you to be a relatively high weird. Whereas this just lets you make cool little changes, even if you're only a weird one. It's a good addition.
The unresolved question, though, is what happens if you dramatic fail that weird roll?
Well, I can tell you right now that ladder's getting formed, but it's not taking you where you want it to go.
Yep. Then we move on to goblin fruits and oddments. Just a basic instructional guide for some hedge botany.
I think if anybody likes herbalism, or if you were a fan of Roots of Legend from Changeling, Dreaming, I think you're going to love this section.
I assume this informed that book to some extent, even though it's for dreaming. I'll ask Andrew. We'll see. So we get some notes on cultivation. While there does need to be some naturalistic logic, i.e. swamp flowers don't grow well in the hedge desert, the hedge ecosystems need not exactly match Earth. And one of the key things about that is that transplanting these plants in order to grow them require unique fertilizers that often entail thematic sacrifice. The examples we get here are blood, carcasses, dreams, attribute dots, skill dots, memory, and sanity.
I'm going to mention that giving up the attribute dot, the skill, or a bit of your sanity are temporary changes. And I love the idea of any of these nutrients being used. It really helps settle how unsettling and unearthly goblin fruits and oddments actually are.
After you transplant the plants, you roll wits plus craft to cultivate them, getting a bonus depending on the fertilizer that you used. It also takes some days to get it to grow. There's a note on the psychoactivity wherein the gardener's emotional state can influence how the plant grows. Yeah. A lot of these too have thematic connections. So if you're growing something really foul and acidic or whatever, you probably want to, curse at it while it grows or something. Talk to your plants, but don't say nice things. And there's also some notes on hybridization, where you can make combinations of fruit and fruit, or oddment and oddment, but they are fundamentally unpredictable. We get a whole bunch of examples. Most of them are useful and disgusting. Any favorites among the goblin fruits?
Yes, I'll try to get through these 6 very quickly. If you don't mind the nausea, consuming broom bulbs will teleport you out of the hedge. Nice. If you can defeat a powerful hobgoblin guard, you can obtain the Hera pear, which can cure literally any disease. If you don't mind munching on some living grubs, a worm thumb makes you a masterful escape artist.
That was my favorite.
Ugh, those grubs. Covering your skin in Toville's ooze will make you resilient to harm, but be prepared for a painful peel a week later.
Ew.
Tattoo yourself with a scar thistle, and your glamour can now give you a bonus to one skill. Just a nice touch. And finally, if you can somehow pour the residue from the ambulatory walking Gertrude into somebody's shoes, then it will slow them down to a snail's pace whenever they walk. Don't know how you'll ever get to use it, but I love it.
Right on. After that, we get a few brief notes on hobgoblins. Really just notes, like they can be trained. There's a merit in the last chapter where it specifically lets you train hobgoblins. They can be created by leaving a normal animal in the hedge, but who would do that? And indeed, that is a clarity breaking point no matter how much clarity you have.
I've noted here that it is cruel and gruesome.
Yes.
You really should not do this.
And ultimately, they are intelligent creatures, and they obey hedge ecology. A hedge dog is not a dog. A hedge squirrel is not a squirrel. So, there's also, a sidebar on the rendering cottage, which, this is a hard no for lots of players. I feel like this is like one of the vegan pamphlets that you get handed on a street corner. But good for villains. If you really want to get players to hate a villain, have the rendering cottage as a place. Anyway.
After that, we get information about hollows, and boy, howdy, do we get a lot of information about hollows.
I'm glad they reiterate here that a hollow isn't safe. It's just safer than the hedge itself. It's an important reminder.
Like a boat on the ocean, as they put it. They, when they get into the explanation of actually creating a hollow, it's fun because they say, well, you can just find a hollow, but you can literally make one. It just requires clearing out an area, spending glamour, and then bringing in furniture or building it from the surrounding hedge. And literally any furniture will do. Just grab a chair. You can even bring in stuff from the material world. So if you have your favorite bookshelf, go ahead and drag it into the hedge if the portal is big enough. After that, we get 8 new hollow furnishings for those of you who like home decor in your games, and God knows I do. This includes the unsettling, grueling pot that renders anything down to its base components, and the decadent feasting table. There is a sidebar that suggests you can bring phones in the hedge, but they are unreliable in the case of landlines, and just plain spooky if you are trying to do it with a cell phone. What were your favorite of the furnishings?
It's actually feasting table and phone. I put phone in quotation marks, though. So, yeah. There's also, I think there's a Storyteller's Vault supplement that gets deep into this mini game of hollow building, especially with amenities.
Oh, is there?
I'm struggling to remember the name of it, but if you're into crafting hollows as an exercise, it's a really good resource.
Nota bene, getting players invested in hollows is a fantastic way to give the group a fun meeting spot and to add some flavor to any group. I did it in my Lost game where they had a little hot springs resort as their meeting place, and it would just be a bunch of changelings getting together in swimsuits, hanging out in hot springs and chatting about their latest plans to fight against the True Fae or whatnot.
It's going to take a lot of time and successes, though. Be ready.
Speaking of time and successes...
Well, yeah.
We get a more detailed treatment of what wards might look like, such as dizzying flower pollen and screeching hobgoblin birds. But what I really meant to say is how you create doorways out of your hollow into the material world gets way more detail than I imagined they would ever come up with.
Yeah, so many successes. I thought you were about to jump into hedge spinning, because that also takes a lot of time and successes.
I'm ready to jump right into hedge spinning if you're ready for hedge spinning.
Well, yeah, so hedge spinning. The bespoke tokens to dazzle and embellish, and how to make them.
I was confused at first about this, because the term hedge spinning is not actually in the core book. There is the term hedge-spun raiments, and I thought that's what they were talking about here at first, but no, it appears to just be making any kind of token you want.
Yeah. Well, but not like tokens, right? See, this is where it gets fuzzy, because a token, as in a thing that you buy with merit points, generally seems to be a thing that a changeling can't make directly. But then hedge-spun stuff is also token, right?
It seems like a weird distinction to make, given that they kind of work out to being the same, practically.
Yeah, and like you do still have to spend dots on hedge-spun stuff. So I don't know. It's not exactly clear to me how one hashes that out. And it's because the costs are so steep, it feels like the kind of thing you could maybe do once a story. So it is very involved. But we get a lot of information about how to do it, from the blueprinting and the recipeing to the crafting rules you need to some suggestions on what kinds of bonuses you might be able to get from like a piece of clothing or a weapon or whatever.
There is a note that you need to figure out what a token's story is going to be as part of making it, and see that story through to completion if you want to make it hedge spun.
And also that the pieces that fit together to create the object can be thematic or fanciful or a mix of both, and are often bound with intangible reagents such as a cry of pain, rather than being like perfectly fit together.
We also get some new uses for hedge spinning, which includes you can make automatons, art, machines, new qualities for hedge spun raiments, along with a suggestion that each such item on the changeling's person gives them a socialized bonus.
Yeah, fancy new garb.
I don't think you pay experience if you make it yourself, but it does require dozens of successes to do it and several weeks at minimum. So
yeah, I think the example they give takes 100.
Yeah. Oh boy. You can spend Glamour for automatic successes, and that character has a workshop to cut the time in half. But unless your adventures are taking place over the course of several weeks like they do in my games, you're never going to see the fruits of your labor.
The goblin fruits.
Haha! Conceptually, though, I like hedge spinning. What do you think?
Yeah, conceptually it's great. I just wish the systems were a little bit more streamlined to make it easier for players to get into. Because I think, like, much as with the Pledgesmith, it feels like this needs to be your character's specialty that you spend the majority of your time on to have it be worth it.
Oh, 100%. You do need to be a specialist. You really should buy that workshop merit.
I think Terry Robinson made a comment in Mage the Podcast that was like, if you introduce a spaceship into a game, the game becomes about your spaceship. And it's that kind of feeling.
I could see that.
Anyway. Finally, last but not least.
Tokens!
So, all right.
You know what, Puka, in general, I find the tokens here, I like them more than the ones in the core book.
I'll be honest, I didn't do like a point-by-point comparison, but I do have a couple favorites. For me, the Horcotton Trifle and the Blood Poppet were my favorites. The latter because you could do some vivid Lost becoming like their keeper stories from the perspective of the fetch. Because this is the one that lets you, it's basically a voodoo doll for your fetch. And that any character that takes that, I would, as a storyteller, want to play up the consequences of using it.
That one hurts me to read. What's the other one do?
It's like hoarfrost, the ice that kind of gets extruded from plants. If you scrape it off of a hedge plant and roll it into a little puff and then later eat it, it gives you immunity to fire for turns equal to your weird.
Nice.
Yeah.
My three favorites are if you put a grave nail under somebody's pillow, then they sleep poorly and cough painfully the next morning.
Yeah.
The other two I like, if your freehold is ever in a truly desperate situation, you may blow upon the aurochs horn to summon your keeper to fight by your side. However, you should never use this because you are also agreeing to allow your keeper to stay in this world indefinitely, and 7 children will vanish into fairy the same night.
Yeah.
This is definitely something you put in as a plot device for a game.
And also something that you'd have to play up the consequences for the character that uses it.
Oh, yeah.
Psychological.
And finally, Minister the Burnham's Clepsydra. it literally silences everyone around you while you have your hand on it, and it gives you a bonus to talking.
Sorry, yeah, I was pointing out the ones for the standard tokens. I also have favorites because they do differentiate the standard tokens from the promise tokens, which, I'll be honest, I was really confused by what they were going for with those. Yeah.
We get the standard tokens, which require you throw something into Hedge and just come back in a few weeks and hope that it's still there and turned into something useful. The Hedge spun tokens, which I think basically work the same, it's just you have to make them yourself. And the promise tokens, which they require a vow slot to make up, and they have a benefit and catch built into it. So they work a little bit differently, and I'm not sure the examples actually follow through with what they say a promise token works like.
And there's no guidance on creating them. It just says they're these things. They strike me as the physical manifestations of pledges, or a particular kind of pledge. But
seems to be.
It doesn't really say, here's how you make one, here's how you balance one, in the same way that we got for the hedge spun tokens. Like, that last category, those are the products of that whole system we just got. So
I'll be honest with you, Puka. It seems to me like promise tokens are incredibly powerful and very easy to make.
And also, so like, major effects. Like, there's one where it's, you never gain willpower again. Like, what? Make someone a target for true fae abduction.
Oh, that one. Oh my god. Oh.
But I did pick out favorites for these. I liked the black nickel, where you can give it to a mortal and they can borrow your skill dots for a price. And ink and irons, which kind of creates tattoos that create an empathic bond between two fae who are like rivals and need to be brought to heel or whatever. Among the hedge spun tokens, I also liked the clepsydra, but that's just because it's one of my favorite words.
What does it mean?
It literally means water thief. Like kleptomania, kleps is thief, and then hydro.
That's so cool.
So it's a thief of water, because it's a water clock, so it steals the water, and it's like the time running out. Beautiful. I also liked the heavenly stem, which is like this elemental sword.
Oh, that's the one that can like transform and give itself a different benefit every time you use it, right?
Yeah. And they're all like different, associated with the classic elements and everything.
These are so cool. Like, my general thing with the tokens in this chapter is that I find the benefits are much better and the drawbacks are more tolerable or interesting than their counterparts in the core book.
I'm going to agree with the exception of the promise token. But overall, turning to the chapter as a whole, I think lots of the ideas here are great. A lot of them can be, again, ported into Dreaming with ease, especially coming up with flora and fauna for a dreaming game. To clarify my position a little bit too, I think I've said before, I want Changeling the Dreaming games to be primarily grounded on Earth, and I'm surprised that Lost is so encouraging of its protagonists going into the Hedge, because one would think they'd be much less eager to do that. But, given the sort of infinity of possibilities in both games, be it the Hedge or the Dreaming, I want to see ideas and guidance for plotting out the moments when a game does go there. Of the systems in this chapter, the hedge spinning one might be my favorite because it leans on narrative more than dots, but then the economy of it, like those heavy dot costs are harsher than just heavy glamour costs. Let me rephrase that. The dot costs for buying up merits and the successes you need to make something of your own both make it kind of prohibitive. So that's something which I would probably adjust.
Yeah, I could see that. The chapter overall for me was good, though I've always felt that the Hedge really gets a hodgepodge treatment throughout the entire game line. But everything in here is, with the exception of their brief mention of hobgoblins, is interesting, if nothing else, and gives you more crunch and some more fun options. So, worth a look.
Would you extend that to, well, let me segue. Any comments about the book as a whole?
The book as a whole is one of my favorites. It has some of the most detailed treatments of many of the systems and entities that are in the Changeling the Lost universe. It answers a lot of questions that folks might have had about things like the mask or iron. has a lot of amazing stories included in it, and a ton of crunch that's going to be useful to you both at character creation and further down the road. Plus, the additional subsystems that it introduces are easy enough to use or to leave aside. The only thing I struggle with is a lot of the optional systems in the first chapter. I feel like they make better drawbacks for merits or just outright flaws rather than unique systems. But beyond that, and the fact that some of this is, again, just reiterating stuff we know, I don't have a lot of complaints about this book, and I have a lot of nice things to say. I'm going to reiterate what I said at the beginning. If you were to pick up one supplement for 1E at this point in our reading, this is the one that I would recommend to folks.
Yeah, certainly as a player, at least. I think I agree that this is probably my favorite book of the first edition. That being said, I don't remember the ones after this as well, so I may change my mind once we read through them. But yeah, as much as I love the sort of range of options and ideas from Winter Masks, I think this one is slightly more valuable because, like I said, it hashes out a lot of those systems that are Lost specific that can be potentially confusing. And I personally like when those systems are accompanied by equally robust lore and story guidance beyond just what dice do you roll, how many dots to spend, because that brings the crunch to life within the setting. And this book has plenty of both. The second half is definitely crunchier, but overall I think there's equal amounts of system and setting. On top of that, the writing was markedly less frustrating, the structuring made sense, and I came away not only with lots of pre-made options that I can use, but more confidence that I can develop my own. With a couple spots that still trip me up a bit, but overall, I think that's the case.
And I think it does nicely in comparison to Autumn Nightmares, which also talks about the true fae, but I honestly feel like the discussion here is better than what we get in there. So, yeah, overall, fantastic book.
We have one listener comment from Siglosson Jr.
Oh, wonderful. What do we got?
The time requirements for the Token Maker merit are absolutely absurd. In my game, I just ended up getting the Relic Creator merit from the WoD Reliquary book instead, because its time requirements are much more reasonable. I will admit that this game has historically not had much downtime, so that might be influencing my opinion, but still. Hard agree.
Yeah, so if you're playing first edition and you wanted to use this system, first and most importantly, make sure that your storyteller is going to be running a game that will take place over the course of months.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're not going to get a use out of this. And number 2, go ahead and max out the appropriate stats for this. Buy high wits or strength, buy high crafts, look the modifiers, spend a lot of glamour, get yourself a workshop. There's undoubtedly some seeming kith or benefit or contract that's going to give you more dice of it that will get this down to something that you can reasonably do over the course of 2 to 3 weeks.
8 sessions. Oh, okay.
I think you'll be able to do it within the course of like a story or 2. And I think you can get it to a point that is reasonable. However, the system would have benefited from going more into details about to handle that.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the comment, and I think that's about all I have to say about this book.
Same here. What are we talking about next week?
Well, I guess we're moving into the summer. In the meantime, if you would like to keep the conversation going, you can reach out to us on Discord at discord.me/CTP. Send us an email at podcast@changelingthepodcast.com. Check us out on Facebook or YouTube under Changeling the Podcast. We have a Mastodon, changelingpod at dice.camp, and you can sign up for our Patreon at patreon.com/changelingthepodcast. Links to these and other stuff from the episode will be in the show notes to this episode. So once again, I've been Puka.
And I am Fetch. And remember, doing all of these things will in fact help keep the true fae at bay.
And don't forget to tip your pledge smith. They work hard. Inflation's a beast. A hedge beast.
Oh my god.
Certain Be Charmed furnishings are more or less compulsory for a well-kept hollow.
Even a basic crash space needs a hedge-spun futon, stuffed with griffin down, and whose drawback is the bar in the middle that always seems to press on your spine during the night. Kitchens do well when they equip themselves with heavy-duty juicers that can process even the thickest carapace goblin fruit, and token coffee pots whose stovetop espresso temporarily blinds those who drink more than 3 cups in exchange for potent hallucinatory visions. Candles scented with thyme and lavender keep away hobgoblins rooting through the garbage cans out back, and some basic equipment for everyday use, like a vacuum cleaner and a venom-coated harpoon, should come standard in any hedge home. Curtains are optional, but nice. We try to provide as hospitable a space as we can on our own digital holo at www.discord.me/ctp, so do stop by for a visit. You can also support our show by signing up for Patreon at www.patreon.com/changelingthepodcast, thereby joining the ranks of our esteemed patrons who get a shout-out of thanks each episode, like so: Bad Company, Derek, Dorcadus, Elorus, Hugo the Bogperson, Ia Bull, Jason Vines, Oreo, Razgaboos, Sandjigger, Sija, and Simon Strand. Huzzah! We also welcome reviews on the podcast listening platform of your greatest convenience, or just tell a friend about our show to get the word out. Whichever of these options you might choose, thanks as always for listening. Track your goblin pledges carefully, and until next time, keep on dreaming.